Hi, my name is Greg, and I'm an academic coach here at SNHU. Welcome to this guide on test anxiety. So think about how you feel when you take a test or a quiz or an assessment. Does it happen in just certain courses, or does it happen overall? Do you ever feel like when you're taking a test that you feel like you've studied and you blank out? Do you ever feel confident on the test and then find that when you see a question that was difficult or you were hoping wasn't going to be on the test, do you panic and get nervous? And does time constraints bother you? So here's what test anxiety does. When we get nervous for a test, instead of allowing our brain to relax and retrieve the information that we studied and prepared for, we tell our brain to do something else. We tell it to sit in the corner and focus on being nervous instead of retrieving the information. So that's why if you've ever experienced a time where you've taken a test and you blank out during the test, and then as soon as you hand in the test, you realize that you had made some mistakes. And that's because now that the moment is over that you were anxious about, now your brain can relax and retrieve the information that you had questions on, but it couldn't do that during the exam because you were focused on letting the brain make you nervous. So test anxiety is a habit. So think of any habit that you've ever had to break. Sometimes it doesn't break immediately or easily. Often it takes a lot of practice and reminders for ourselves to keep breaking that habit. If you think of biting your fingernails, well, then to break that habit, you probably bit your fingernails numerous times, and you had to keep reminding yourself every time you noticed you were biting your fingernails, hey, stop doing that. And eventually you would break that habit. Well, hopefully we can take that same approach to test anxiety. So here's some tips that we can use to reduce our test anxiety. Tip number one is make sure that you're prepared. Make sure that you've studied, make sure that you're organized. And if it's an exam on which you can use your notes, make sure you can easily and efficiently access the information that you have written down. Make sure you're doing problems. Make sure you're not just reading, because we find that's not really authentic to how you take a test. They're not just going to ask you to read to demonstrate knowledge. They're going to ask you questions. So make sure that when you study, you practice by doing questions. So let's say for math, you want to make sure that you're doing questions, not just reading notes or looking at examples you've already done, but doing problems and testing your knowledge and seeing what you remember and what you understand how to do. Also, make sure you space out your study or review. When your brain just starts to forget information, that's a wonderful time to review because it struggles to retrieve that information. But what it's doing is it's wearing a path in your brain to the location of where it stored that information, so that the next time it'll be a lot easier to retrieve that information. Tip number two, relax. Now, I know that's easier said than done. We've developed this habit of making ourselves nervous for a test. So to break this habit, it might take a few tries. So here's some strategies we can utilize to help us relax. Take 5 deep, long yoga type breaths. What that does is it will increase the flow of oxygen to our brain and allow it to work more efficiently, as well as slowing our heart rate to help us relax and not be so nervous. Another approach I've used with students is call the test a worksheet instead of a test. We seem to get really nervous because of the accountability of a test, whereas I could give that exact same test and those exact same questions on a worksheet the night before a test, and students will do great. I can give the exact same information on a test and they won't do as well because they're nervous, because they say, well, now it counts. Now I'm anxious about the accountability side of things. Well, then just call it a worksheet and relax. Tip number 3, practice kicking out those negative thoughts. A lot of times during an exam, we think of the negative things, all those what ifs. What if I don't know what I'm doing? What if I don't get a good grade? Those kind of negative thoughts aren't going to be questions on the exam. So why let our brains dedicate any energy to things that aren't on the exam? So as a solution, take another deep breath Allow yourself to refocus and stay on task. Tip number 4, cognitive reappraisal. This is one of the things I've learned here at SNHU. Believe in yourself and say, I can do this. Say that out loud. Believe it or not, it does help you. I think it releases endorphins in your brain or chemicals in your brain that allow you to feel more positive and allow you to be more successful and confident. Also thinking of an exam much like a trivia game. A lot of us watch game shows on television and we're testing our knowledge. So if you've ever watched Jeopardy and tried to answer the questions before the contestants, well, you are testing yourself. There's no letter grade, but why are you doing that on your own free time? Because we enjoy the satisfaction of examining and understanding knowledge and demonstrating we have that knowledge. So treat an exam just like that. It's just an assessment. It's just to see what knowledge you have. So treat it like a trivia game. Tip number 5, when you see a problem that throws you for a loop, again, it's really challenging, or you might feel there's a lot of steps to it, or it's a type of problem or topic that you were hoping wasn't going to be on the exam and it turns out it was. For a lot of us, it throws us for a loop. It puts us into a state of panic. And then any questions after that one on the exam, we tend to do poorly on because we're already in this state of panic. So try this. Anticipate there's going to be one of those questions on the exam. Don't let it surprise you. Anticipate there will be one. So then when you see that question in the exam, just skip it. Say, I knew you were going to be here. I'll skip it. I'll finish the rest of the exam in a positive frame of mind. And then hopefully I'll feel pretty good about the exam thinking, well, I did really well on everything else. I just have to go back to this one question or 2 questions that I skipped. And hopefully you can earn some either partial credit or do well on that exam question later. And finally, tip number 6, focus on the learning and the letter grade will happen as a result. Much like youth sports, a good coach will focus on teaching young boys and girls the proper fundamentals of a sport instead of focusing on the wins or losses. If they focus on the proper fundamentals, wins will just happen. Well, same thing with exam grades. If you're focused on the learning and making sure you understand the material, good letter grades are just going to happen. When we're focused on the letter grade and saying, boy, I really want that A, we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And when we start to see adversity on an exam, it makes us stress out more than we need to. So try to focus just on the learning and demonstrate what you know, just like a trivia game. So if you get an 80%, well, then that means you understood 80% of the material that you went over in that chapter or unit. So as a summary, here are the tips that I shared with you today. Make sure you're prepared and you've studied. Do your best to relax and practice doing that. Try cognitive reappraisal, believing in yourself and saying, man, I can do this. And I'm excited to take this exam and demonstrate what I know. Practice kicking out those negative thoughts. When you see a problem that's really challenging, skip it and come back to it later, and focus on the learning instead of the letter grade. Thanks for joining me and watching this video on Academic Support's Guide on Test Anxiety. Please read this video's description for further resources.